This next section looks at the homeostatic mechanisms that regulate cardiovascular activity to ensure tissue perfusion. Three factors influence tissue blood flow: cardiac output, peripheral resistance, and blood pressure. The mechanisms involved in regulation of cardiovascular function include autoregulation, neural, and hormonal input. Autoregulation provides an immediate and localized changes in vasoconstrictors and vasodilators. So vasoconstrictors are factors that stimulate contraction, or the vasodilators, which are factors that promote dilation. Tissue temperature, low oxygen, or pH, high carbon dioxide can cause capillary sphincter dilation, which causes peripheral resistance decrease, causing an increase in flow through capillary beds. If autoregulation is unable to normalize tissue conditions, neural and endocrine mechanisms are activated. Baroreceptors and chemoreceptors monitor changes in arterial pressure or blood gas levels. Cardiovascular centers in the medulla oblongata adjust cardiac output, and vasomotor centers in the medulla oblongata control the diameter of arterioles and peripheral resistance, and controls vasoconstriction. Baroreceptors monitor the degree of stretch and are located in both the aortic sinuses, located in pockets and walls of the ascending aorta, and aortic reflexes adjust the flow through systemic circuits. And carotid sinuses are very sensitive to ensure adequate flow to and perfusion of the brain. As this diagram shows, when blood pressure climbs, the baroreceptors stimulate the cardioinhibitory centers, while inhibiting the cardioexcitatory and vasomotor centers. This leads to a decrease in cardiac output and vasodilation, causing blood pressures to decline. Chemoreceptors are sensitive to changes in carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH in blood and cerebrospinal fluid. These chemoreceptors are sensory neurons located in carotid and aortic bodies and the medulla oblongata. A decrease in pH or plasma oxygen, an increase in plasma carbon dioxide stimulates the chemoreceptors, which increase the heart rate and arterial constriction, which results in an increase in blood pressure. So to reinforce what we learned in this chapter, the endocrine system provides both short-term and long-term regulation of cardiovascular performance. In the short term, epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla can stimulate cardiac output and peripheral vasoconstriction. Long-term cardiovascular regulation is involved in the participation of other hormones, such as antidiuretic hormone and angiotensin II, as well as erythropoietin, which all three can raise the blood pressure when it gets too low. On the contrary, atrial natriuretic peptide ANP can lower the blood pressure when it is too high. Antidiuretic hormone is released from the posterior pituitary in response to a decrease in blood volume, an increase in blood osmolarity, and or the presence of angiotensin II, and it results in vasoconstriction and conserving water by the kidneys, increasing blood volume. When blood pressure decreases, the kidney secretes renin, which leads to a cascade of reactions forming angiotensin II, which then stimulates carbon monoxide and atrial constriction. When blood pressure decreases, the kidneys secrete renin, which, as I mentioned, leads to a cascade of reactions forming angiotensin II. Angiotensin II stimulates cardiac output and arterial constriction, which results in immediate increases in blood pressure, as well as stimulating the release of antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone to stimulate the thirst center. Erythropoietin is also released by the kidneys when the blood pressure drops and plasma oxygen drops. Erythropoietin stimulates red blood cell production and increases blood volume. Atrionatriuretic peptide is released by the atrial walls when the blood pressure increases from the stretch of the arterial wall due to more venous return. The effect is an increase in sodium and therefore water loss by the kidneys, and it reduces thirst. It blocks the release of antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and it stimulates arterial dilation. That brings us to a checkpoint when you pause the recording before you move on to the next section. This next section in your textbook discusses how the cardiovascular system responds to two common stresses, exercise and blood loss. At rest, the cardiac output averages about 5.8 liters per minute, but during exercise, both cardiac output and patterns of blood distribution can change. One of the responses is extensive vasodilation, and this is due to an increase in oxygen consumption. The vasodilation causes lower peripheral resistance and results in increased flow. This then increases venous return due to skeletal muscle and respiratory pumps. And as a result of increased venous return, cardiac output increases to meet the needs of the extensive vasodilation due to the oxygen consumption. Ultimately, you've come full circle as arterial pressure is maintained. However, at higher levels of exertion, blood flow is shunted away from the non-essential organs. This is to ensure adequate perfusion of the heart and skeletal muscles. Only blood supply to the brain is unaffected. In the last chapter, we talked about blood clotting as a local circulatory reaction to a minor break in the wall of the blood vessel. Actually, I think it was the chapter before, but either way, when this clotting response fails to prevent significant blood loss and blood pressure falls, the entire cardiovascular system begins to make adjustments. The immediate goal is to maintain adequate blood pressure and peripheral blood flow. So long-term cardiovascular response to hemorrhage may take several days to restore blood volume to its normal conditions. Fluids are accessed from interstitial spaces, kind of slurped right out. Antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone are going to be released to promote fluid retention, and your thirst will increase. The erythropoietin will be released from the kidneys to trigger red blood cell production, and all in all, these mechanisms are all going to sum up to leading to an increase in the volume of the blood and an increase in the blood pressure. This next section in the chapter looks at three functional patterns of the cardiovascular system. When comparing the right side of the body to the left side, the distribution of arteries and veins is nearly identical, except near the heart where the large vessels connect to the atria or the ventricles. A single vessel may undergo name changes as it crosses anatomical boundaries, so watch out for that. This is often to be more descriptive about which structures they're supplying or they're draining. And anastomosis of the arteries and veins are present to reduce the threat of temporary blockage of a vessel to an organ. These anastomoses provide a backup blood supply in a worst-case scenario. So the next few sections in your textbook look at the vessels of the pulmonary and systemic circuit. In the pulmonary circuit, blood exits the right ventricle through the pulmonary trunk. It branches into left and right pulmonary arteries, where it enters the lungs, where arterial branching nearly parallels the branchings of the respiratory airways. The smallest arteriole feeds the capillaries surrounding the alveolus. And then oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium through the left and right superior and inferior pulmonary veins. And this brings us to another checkpoint. And even though this is a short recording, I think we'll stop here as the next recording will begin with the systemic circuit.